Welcome to our deep dives today. We're going to be looking into mind control, its history and methods.
Okay.
And we've got quite the stack of sources here, everything from ancient philosophy to modern media analysis, and even, believe it or not, some declassified CIA documents.
Wow.
It seems like we're going to be uncovering how events and figures throughout history, which seem totally unconnected on the surface, are actually woven together into, well, a narrative of control and influence. Have you ever stopped to think about whether your own thoughts, your own behaviors are being shaped by forces outside of yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's a disturbing thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you might not have considered it before, but once we start unpacking some historical examples, like
Yeah.
Edward Bernays using psychology to get people to eat more bacon and eggs,
Hmm.
or the really disturbing experiments of Dr. Ewan Cameron, you might start to see things just a little bit differently. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the most fascinating things is that this whole concept of mind control, it's not a new phenomenon. It's been around for centuries, manifesting in different ways throughout history.
Right, and our sources actually start us off in ancient times with priests using eclipses to gain power over people.
Makes sense.
I mean, if you think about it, people back then, they didn't understand the science behind an eclipse. So they must have been terrified.
Absolutely. I mean, it would seem like the end of the world.
Right. A clever priest could easily use that kind of fear to,
Hmm.
to influence people, to gain control. And it makes you wonder, has mind control been shaping history far longer than we even realize?
It certainly raises those sorts of questions, like about how perception can be controlled. One of our sources brings up Plato's allegory of the cave. It's this incredibly powerful metaphor that people have been discussing for centuries. Basically, the idea is that our understanding of reality is limited by, well, what we're allowed to experience.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of like in The Matrix. When Morpheus offers Neo the red pill or the blue pill, one pill keeps you plugged into this fake reality, and the other pill reveals a completely different truth.
Right.
It seems like that choice, the awareness of how easily we can be manipulated, it just keeps popping up over and over again in our sources. What do you think?
I think so. And, as history moves forward, those methods of control just keep getting more and more sophisticated. If we jump ahead a few centuries, we've got Machiavelli.
Machiavelli, right?
One of our sources brings up his book, The Prince, which is basically a guide for rulers on how to manipulate people.
Yeah, and how to maintain power, often through deception and lying.
Exactly.
I mean, his work is definitely disturbing. But in a way, it's also insightful because he just lays bare the psychology of power in this raw, unfiltered way.
It's very interesting to think about. But then we have another source that highlights Etienne de la Boétie's discourse on voluntary servitude. Have you heard of that one?
I don't think so, no.
It's really fascinating. He argues that understanding the tactics of control is actually the key to resisting them. So, in a way, it's like the opposite of the prince.
Right.
He believed that knowledge could empower individuals just as much as it empowers those rulers.
So it's like a counter strategy manual. If you know how they're trying to control you, you're less likely to fall for it. I like that. Knowledge is power.
Exactly. And it's crucial because the deeper we go into these sources, the more unsettling these methods become.
That's for sure.
We start to get into things like social Darwinism and eugenics.
Oh,
These theories, they're based on this warped interpretation of natural selection, and they were used to justify, well, a lot of terrible things like social hierarchy, exploitation, and even some of the most horrific events in human history.
yeah. It's just unbelievable how these so-called scientific ideas were used to justify discrimination and violence.
Right.
It makes you wonder, if any belief system, even one that seems rooted in science, can be twisted to serve malicious purposes.
It's very true. And that leads us to another chilling concept from our sources, and that's the idea of humans as resources.
Humans as resources.
Yeah. This term emerged in the 1930s, and basically it dehumanizes individuals, reducing them to assets that can be managed and exploited for profit.
It's like something straight out of a dystopian novel. You're not a person, you're just a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
A resource to be used up and discarded.
Exactly. And it makes you think about the systems that we live in today, right? Are they designed to empower individuals, or are they designed to shape us into these compliant, manageable units? It's a very unsettling question that these sources keep raising.
It is unsettling. Speaking of systems, there's a lot in our sources about education, about school, and it's pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah. The sources highlight the Prussian education system. It was originally designed to create obedient soldiers,
Obedient soldiers.
not necessarily critical thinkers.
Right.
And its emphasis on rote learning, strict discipline, unquestioning obedience, it's pretty alarming when you think about it.
So you're saying that our modern education system, it's modeled after a system designed to churn out soldiers. That's a little unsettling to consider.
It is, isn't it? And that's where the work of John Taylor Gatto becomes really relevant. He argues that compulsory schooling, while well-intentioned, often stifles creativity and independent thought,
Yeah, I can see that.
potentially producing citizens who are, well, more compliant than truly educated.
So the system might be unintentionally creating exactly what those in power want.
Mm.
A population that doesn't question authority because they've never been taught to think for themselves.
Yeah. It's definitely a thought-provoking argument, and things get even darker when we factor in the CIA's M-Culture project.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting and pretty creepy. The M-Culture project was all about experimenting with mind control. They were using LSD, hypnosis, and even torture, all on unwitting citizens.
Yeah, and the sources paint a very chilling picture of what went on during those experiments.
The ethical implications of that are just staggering. It's deeply disturbing that a government agency would experiment on its own people in that way.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, did these programs really end? Or have they just evolved into something more covert, more hidden? That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
Speaking of chilling, let's talk about media and advertising. I mean, we all know that ads are trying to sell us things,
Sure.
but our sources argue that the manipulation goes much, much deeper than that.
Well, think about Edward Bernays,
Okay.
Sigmund Freud's nephew. He was really a pioneer in using psychological techniques for advertising and public relations. He really understood how to manipulate public perception, even create artificial needs and desires in people.
So it's not just about selling us products we need, it's about creating desires for things we didn't even know we wanted.
Exactly. For example, Bernays is credited with, convincing people that a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs was the best way to start the day.
Oh,
He essentially manufactured a cultural norm that we still see today.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It really makes you think twice about all the forces that shape our everyday choices. What we buy, what we eat, what we wear.
And it's not just about creating desires, it's also about exploiting our psychology.
Okay.
One of the concepts our sources bring up is cognitive dissonance.
Hmm.
That's that mental discomfort we feel when our beliefs and our actions don't align.
Right.
Advertisers know how to exploit that discomfort to make us feel like we need their products to resolve that inner conflict.
It's brilliant and manipulative at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're playing us against ourselves.
Exactly. And this leads us to another fascinating point that our sources raise, which is the whole issue of pharmaceutical control.
Pharmaceutical control, right.
Yeah.
There's a lot in here about the over-medication of society,
Mm.
the role of pharmaceutical companies in shaping how we think about and treat mental illness.
Yeah. It seems like they might be shaping how mental illnesses are diagnosed, even pushing drug-based solutions over other approaches. Some of the sources raise some serious concerns about the validity of certain mental health diagnoses, particularly when it comes to what is considered normal behavior. They're asking, are anti-authoritarian tendencies being pathologized? Essentially, are we turning dissent into a medical condition treatable with drugs?
So if you question authority, you might be labeled as mentally ill. That's a terrifying thought.
It is a provocative argument. It makes you think about how we define mental health and illness and whether those definitions are being used to control dissent, to create a society where people are more focused on their anxieties and inner conflicts than on questioning the systems around them.
Wow, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Now for a completely depressing topic, learned helplessness. This came from those experiments they did on dogs, right?
Yeah. They had two groups of dogs.
Okay.
One group could stop the electric shocks they were getting. The other group, they had no control over the pain. And the dogs who couldn't escape the shocks, they eventually just gave up, even when they had the opportunity to escape.
Oh man, that's heartbreaking. But what does this mean for humans?
Well, our sources connect this to political apathy, how we become so conditioned to this lack of control over our lives that we just give up and let those in power make all the decisions. It's a question we should all be asking ourselves, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. I mean, if we believe we can't change anything, why even bother trying, right?
Exactly, and that's the trap that our sources are warning us about, that sense of powerlessness. It makes us more susceptible to manipulation. It makes us less likely to resist those systems that are shaping our reality.
So, wow, we've covered some pretty bleak territory in this deep dive so far. Ancient manipulation, twisted science, secret government experiments, and maybe even an education system that's failing us. Let's end on a more hopeful note. Our sources also talk about solutions, about resistance. So given everything we've learned, how can we actually resist these forms of control?
Well, the most powerful antidote to manipulation, it's critical thinking. Our sources emphasize questioning authority, evaluating information from various sources, forming our own conclusions. Don't just blindly accept pre-packaged narratives.
So it's about reclaiming our agency, realizing that we do have the power to choose what we believe and how we respond to the world around us.
Exactly.
But how do we do that in a world that seems determined to control our every thought and action? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
We just finished talking about how important critical thinking is. But it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this talk about mind control. How can we, like as individuals, really make a difference against these huge systems?
Well, I think one thing that can help is understanding the historical context. One of our sources actually talks about this place called the Tavistock Institute in Britain. It was basically a research center dedicated to understanding human behavior.
So like a whole institute for mind control. It sounds like something out of a spy movie.
Well, some people might argue that's what it was. Their research went beyond just brainwashing or interrogation techniques. They were exploring things like social psychology, how to manipulate groups, even create large-scale cultural shifts.
Wow.
It really gets you thinking about how social trends throughout history might have been influenced by these kinds of tactics.
It's a little creepy. Some of our sources actually mentioned a guy named Dr. John Rawlings Rees. He worked at Tavistock, and he actually coined the term psychological shock troops. What did he mean by that?
Well, Rees had this vision of a network of psychiatrists who could subtly influence society. He even advocated for treating people, quote, even when they do not wish it, end quote.
Whoa.
So, it's kind of a chilling concept, using forced psychological treatment as a way to control society.
Yeah, it really blurs the lines between therapy and manipulation. Could these types of techniques be used today, do you think, to steer people toward certain beliefs or behaviors? Yeah.
It's a question worth considering. Another figure connected to Tavistock was this guy, Kurt Lewin, a really prominent social psychologist. He pioneered something called action research.
Action research, okay. What's that?
Basically, it's all about managing change within groups and organizations. Lewin studied how to shift people's attitudes and behaviors, how to make them more receptive to new ideas. The concerning part is how these principles were applied in the real world.
So this wasn't just some theoretical stuff happening in a lab. They were actually trying to influence people's behaviors out there in everyday life.
Right. And to really understand the impact, I think we need to follow the money.
Oh, okay, interesting.
The sources point to familiar names like the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Ford Foundation.
Hey, that's good.
These wealthy foundations, they poured a ton of money into research related to social psychology, education, even pharmaceuticals.
So these, seemingly benevolent foundations may have had their own agendas.
It's possible, right? It seems like a classic power play. Using vast wealth to control information, shape public opinion, and their influence, it extended to the education system, too.
Oh.
Some sources argue that these foundations played a key role in promoting the Prussian model of education in America, the one we talked about earlier,
Right.
pushing for compulsory schooling, standardized curricula, the whole thing.
Wait, so they were funding research on mind control A&D shaping the education system. It's like they were building a system to control the minds of future generations.
It's pretty disturbing to think about. And the sources go on to explore how these same techniques were applied to mass media and advertising, particularly with the work of Edward Bernays. Remember him?
Oh, yeah, the father of propaganda.
Yeah.
What else did they find out about him?
Well, what's fascinating is how openly Bernays admitted to manipulating public opinion. He even wrote a book called Propaganda, where he argues that, essentially that controlling the masses was necessary for the good of society.
So he believed that manipulating people was for their own good. Did anyone challenge that?
Bernays was incredibly influential. He worked with corporations, the U.S. government. He shaped public perception on a wide range of issues, everything from what products people buy to, even war.
So it seems like we're up against some really powerful forces here. I mean, knowing all of this, what can we actually do about it? Are we just pawns in some grand game of mind control?
I don't think so. The first step, I think, is awareness. By understanding these tactics, we can start to recognize them and challenge them in our own lives.
Yeah. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it,
Right.
right? But at least you're not just blindly following the program. But how do we go beyond awareness? to actual
Well, the
resistance.
sources really encourage us to, seek out diverse perspectives, to question authority, to think critically about the information we're consuming. Become your own fact checker.
Don't just accept what you're told. Dig deeper, look for evidence, come to your own conclusions.
Right. And nowhere is this more important than when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. Our sources raise some serious concerns about their influence over how mental health is diagnosed and treated.
You mean like the idea that they're pushing pills for every problem, even things that might not actually be medical conditions?
Exactly. They also question the validity of certain diagnoses, suggesting that, maybe behaviors that challenge authority are being medicalized.
So they're basically turning dissent into a disease and silencing it with medication.
It's a scary thought, right? So I think we need to be skeptical, do our own research, advocate for ourselves and our loved ones when it comes to mental health. We shouldn't just blindly accept a diagnosis or a prescription.
Right. Ask questions, get second opinions, explore alternative approaches. That makes sense.
Yeah, and this kind of skepticism is so crucial, especially in today's world with so much information overload and social media manipulation.
Right. I mean, think about it. Every click, every scroll, every like and share, it's all data that's shaping those algorithms, which in turn are shaping our perceptions, influencing our behavior. It's like we're in a constant state of information warfare.
That's a good way to put it. So it's not just about resisting mind control, it's about actively creating a world where, critical thinking, informed choices, individual agency, they're the norm. But how do we make that shift? How do we go from being manipulated to becoming the architects of our own reality?
Okay, so we've been talking about how to resist all this manipulation, how to become more critical thinkers. But honestly, with so much information coming at us these days from all directions, where do we even begin?
It's true, we're drowning in information, but one of the most common and maybe the most insidious forms of manipulation, it's happening right in front of us every time we go online.
What do you mean?
Think about those social media algorithms, the ones that decide what we see in our feeds.
Yeah.
They're designed to keep us scrolling, keep feeding us content that reinforces our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are, well, even if they're not really based on facts.
Right.
So by kind of filtering the information we see, they're creating these echo chambers. It makes it really hard to even see different perspectives.
It's like we're being subtly nudged towards certain beliefs or behaviors, and we don't even realize it's happening.
Exactly.
But it's not just algorithms, right? Think about the news,
Yeah.
the way stories are framed, the language they use, the images they show. It's all designed to make us feel a certain way,
Absolutely.
to shape how we understand what's going on.
That's why media literacy is so important. We need to be aware of the techniques they're using to play on our emotions. We need to question the narratives they're presenting, and we need to seek out different sources of information.
So it's not about avoiding the news or social media altogether.
Yeah.
It's about engaging with them, but critically recognizing that everything has an agenda, right?
Yeah.
A perspective,
Yeah.
a message they're trying to get across.
Exactly. And it also means, being mindful of our own biases, our own preconceived notions, being willing to challenge our own beliefs, when we see new information. I know it's tough, but it's so crucial for breaking free from these echo chambers, to actually think for ourselves.
I hear you. But man, it sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but I think the alternative is even worse.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, the alternative is just blindly accepting whatever we're told to let other people shape our reality for us.
You're right. You're right. So critical thinking, it's not just about like being smart. It's about being empowered, taking control of our own minds, making conscious choices about what we believe and how we act.
Exactly. It's a skill we need to develop. We need to nurture it, practice it, question everything, look for evidence, evaluate different perspectives, be willing to change our minds when we see new information. It really is a lifelong journey, a commitment to keep learning and keep growing.
So it's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions.
And it's about remembering that knowledge is power, but only when we use it wisely. The more we understand about how our minds work, how we're influenced, how to think critically, the better equipped we are, to deal with this crazy world. We can start shaping our own destinies.
Wow. Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive. The history of mind control, the tactics they use to influence us, and the power we have to resist manipulation. We've seen how these forces are at play in everything. I mean, from education to the media to our own personal relationships.
Yeah. And it can be really overwhelming, to confront how pervasive these systems really are. But it's incredibly empowering to realize that we're not powerless. We can think for ourselves, we can question assumptions, challenge authority, and create a world that actually reflects our values.
That is a great message. So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If someone were to analyze your daily habits, your media consumption, your social interactions, what would it reveal about the forces that are shaping your thoughts, shaping your choices?
That's a great question. And I think it's one we all need to ask ourselves. Because if we're not aware of those influences, we're not really free to create the kind of world we want to live in.
That's it for our deep dive into the world of mind control. I don't know about you, but I found this exploration fascinating and definitely thought-provoking.
Me too. And hopefully our listeners did as well.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep thinking for yourself.